the daughter of Jacob and Leah, went to visit some of the young women who lived in the area. But when the local prince, Shechem son of Hamor the Hivite, saw Dina, he seized her and raped her. But then he fell in love with her, and he tried to win her affection with tender words. He said to his father, Hamor, "Get me this young girl. I want to marry her." Soon Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dina. But since his sons were out in the fields herding his livestock, he said nothing until they returned. Hamor, Shechem's father, came to discuss the matter with Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the field as soon as they heard what had happened. They were shocked and furious that their sister had been raped. Shechem had done a disgraceful thing against Jacob's family, something that should never be done. Hamor tried to speak with Jacob and his sons. "My son Shechem is truly in love with your daughter," he said. "Please let him marry her. In fact, let's arrange other marriages too. You give us your daughters for our sons, and we will give you our daughters for your sons. And you may live among us. The land is open to you. Settle here and trade with us, and feel free to buy property in the area." Then Shechem himself spoke to Dina's father and brothers. "Please be kind to me and let me marry her," he begged. "I will give you whatever you ask. No matter what dowry or gift you demand, I will gladly pay it. Just give me the girl as my wife." But since Shechem had defiled their sister Dina, Jacob's sons responded deceitfully to Shechem and his father Hamor. They said to them, "We couldn't possibly allow this because you're not circumcised. It would be a disgrace for our sister to marry a man like you. But here is a solution. If every man among you will be circumcised like we are, then we will give you our daughters, and will take your daughters for ourselves. We will live among you and become one people. But if you don't agree to be circumcised, we will take her and be on our way." Hamor and his son Shechem agreed to their proposal. Shechem wasted no time in acting on this request, for he wanted Jacob's daughter desperately. Shechem was a highly respected member of his family, and he went with his father, Hamor, to present this proposal to the leaders at the town gate. "These men are our friends," they said. "Let's invite them to live here among us and trade freely. Look, the land is large enough to hold them. We can take their daughters as wives and let them marry ours. But they will consider staying here and becoming one people with us only if all of our men are circumcised, just as they are. But if we do this, all their livestock and possessions will eventually be ours. Come, let's agree to their terms and let them settle here among us." So all the men in the town council agreed with Hamor and Shechem, and every male in the town was circumcised. But 3 days later, when their wounds were still sore, 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, who were Dina's full brothers, took their swords and entered the town without opposition. Then they slaughtered every male there, including Hamor and his son Shechem. They killed them with their swords, then took Dina from Shechem's house and returned to their camp. Meanwhile, the rest of Jacob's sons arrived. Finding the men slaughtered, they plundered the town because their sister had been defiled there. They seized all the flocks and herds and donkeys, everything they could lay their hands on, both inside the town and outside in the fields. They looted all their wealth and plundered their houses. They also took all their little children and wives and led them away as captives. Afterward, Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have ruined me. You've made me stink among all the people of this land, among all the Canaanites and Perizzites. We are so few that they will join forces and crush us. I will be ruined, and my entire household will be wiped out. But why should we let him treat our sister like a prostitute?" they retorted angrily.
Well, let's dive right in to a story that's, well, pretty intense. We're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 34, and let me tell you, this is one of those stories that really makes you think.
It sure does.
It's got family drama, cultural clashes, and yeah, even some violence is pretty hard to stomach.
Yeah, this isn't exactly a lighthearted tale.
Definitely not. So we're talking about Jacob and his family, right? They've been on the move for so long, and they finally find a place to settle down.
They're trying to build a life for themselves, find some peace and stability, but it doesn't quite go according to plan.
Things get really complicated really fast.
Yeah.
And at the center of it all is Dina, Jacob's daughter.
Dina's story, unfortunately, it's one that we see repeated throughout history. A young woman who ends up caught in a really, really difficult situation.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking because we don't really get to hear her side of the story. We don't know her thoughts or her feelings about any of this.
Right, she kind of becomes a pawn in this power struggle between the men in her life.
Exactly. So Dinah encounters Shechem, who's the son of a local ruler, and this encounter, it takes a dark turn, to say the least. The text is pretty clear about that.
It doesn't sugarcoat it at all. Shechem takes advantage of Dinah, assaults her.
It's awful. But then there's this really interesting twist. Instead of just being a straightforward villain, Shechem, well, he actually seems to develop feelings for Dinah.
Yeah, the text says he was smitten with her.
He even asks to marry her, which I don't know about you, but that wasn't exactly the reaction I was expecting.
Yeah, it really throws you for a loop. But it's important to remember the cultural context here. Marriage proposals like this, while they seem completely out of line to us today, they weren't unheard of back then.
So are you saying as a way to kind of smooth things over, make what he did okay?
In a way, yeah. It was a way to legitimize what had happened, at least in their eyes.
Wow. Okay. So then we have Shechem's father, Hamor. He goes to Jacob and his sons to try to negotiate some kind of deal.
Right. He's trying to arrange a marriage between Shechem and Dinah.
And Jacob and his sons, I mean, they're outnumbered. They're outsiders in this land. They must have felt incredibly vulnerable.
Absolutely. And you can imagine the range of emotions they're going through. Anger, fear, probably a sense of helplessness. It's an incredibly tense situation.
So what do?
Well, Jacob's sons, they come up with a condition for this marriage, and it's a big one. They say that all the men in Shechem's clan have to be circumcised.
Circumcised. Wow.
Yeah, and this wasn't just some random request. Circumcision held deep cultural and religious significance.
Oh, I bet. I mean, it's still a big deal in many cultures today.
Right. But back then, for Jacob's descendants, circumcision was a sign of their covenant with God, a mark of their identity. It was a huge ask.
I can't even imagine. So they're basically saying, if you want to marry into our family, this is the price you have to pay.
Exact.
To talk about a power move.
It definitely shifted the dynamics.
Yeah.
And it set the stage for what happens next.
I mean, was it like a test, you think, to see how serious they were?
It's possible. But whatever the reason, Hamor and Shechem, they agree to it.
Really? They actually convinced all those men to go through with it.
They did. They somehow managed to sell it to their people. They probably talked about the benefits, the alliances they could forge, the economic advantages.
I guess that makes sense from a purely practical standpoint.
Right. Politics and economics, they often trumped everything else, even back then.
But still, you got to wonder what those men were thinking. I mean, this was a major life change. And let's be real, surgery in those days, not exactly a walk in the park.
No, not at all. It was a painful and risky procedure.
So here you have all these men recovering, vulnerable. And that's when, well, things take a very, very dark turn.
Yeah, this is where the story goes from bad to absolutely horrific. Two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, they decide to take revenge into their own hands.
Dinah's brothers, right?
That's right. And they don't hold back. They launch the surprise attack on the city while the men are still recovering.
Oh, man, that's cold.
It's brutal. They kill every man in the city, Hamor, Shechem, everyone.
Wow. So much for diplomacy.
Yeah, any hope of a peaceful resolution, it just vanishes. And it really makes you think about the nature of revenge.
Because up until this point, you could almost understand where Jacob's sons were coming from, right?
Right.
I mean, their sister had been terribly wronged.
Right. But their actions here, they go so far beyond anything resembling justice. It's just pure, unadulterated violence.
And what's even more disturbing is that they weren't the only ones involved, right?
Sadly, no. The other brothers, they participate too. They loot the city, take everything of value, even women and children.
It's like this total unraveling. One act of violence leading to another, and another. And even Jacob, their own father, he's horrified by what they've done.
Yeah, he realizes the magnitude of what they've unleashed. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. They've essentially declared war on their neighbors.
And put their entire family at risk.
Exactly. Jacob, He understands the complexities of the situation. He gets their anger, their need to protect their family. But he also sees the bigger picture.
He sees the long-term consequences of their actions.
Yes. And he knows that this cycle of violence, it will only lead to more suffering.
It's kind of like, be careful what you wish for, They wanted to protect their family, their honor, but at what cost?
It's that age-old question, isn't it? When does justice become vengeance? And when does vengeance just lead to more pain?
And what's really unsettling is that the story, well, it doesn't really offer any easy answers. It just kind of leaves us hanging with all these loose ends.
That's right. We're left wondering what happens to Dinah. How does she cope with all of this?
Exactly. And what about Jacob and his family? Are they ever able to find peace and security after this?
The text doesn't tell us, but it does leave us with one final, chilling scene. Simeon and Levi, they try to justify their actions to their father. They say, should we have let him treat our sister like a prostitute?
Like, that's supposed to make everything okay.
It's almost as if they're trying to silence any opposition, shut down any debate.
Yeah, and it leaves us with this really uneasy feeling. Like, did they learn anything from this whole experience?
And that's the power of this story, isn't it? It challenges us to confront some really uncomfortable truths about human nature, about the ways that anger and violence can take root, even in the name of family, even in the name of justice.
It's a reminder that even with the best of intentions, even when we think we're doing the right thing, we can still get it wrong. And sometimes those mistakes, they have devastating consequences.
It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. This story has been quite the deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explored the complexities and the challenges of Genesis chapter 34. It's a story that's sure to stay with us long after we close the book.
It certainly will, and it's a story that continues to spark conversation and debate even thousands of years after it was written.